of seats around the front here if anybody wants to move forward. Something like that on the door to let people in rather than leaving them on the bench.
Okay. Hello, welcome. Thanks for coming down tonight to Projectspaceplus. And for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you'll do, Projectspaceplus is the art and design gallery, so it's a space for the presentation and production of the content in fine art and design. And we're really delighted to be able to host a machine aesthetic, which is a touring exhibition curated by Granell and Eric Butcher, which also includes, they're also represented within the show, but also includes our very own Bracey. And the show is an exhibition exploring the role of mechanisation in contemporary art practice, whether that be artists using machines as a means of production, as the artwork in itself, or adopting mechanistic methodologies in the production of the work. And I'm sure they'll tell you more about that. The exhibition tours on to Norwich, and what are the dates for that?
It's having a break after this, so it'll be September the 29th.
And it's also already been Bournemouth and
Gallery North in Newcastle.
So
and then it finishes at Transition Gallery in London.
Of course, yeah. And there's a publication coming out with that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand over to Andrew, Eric, and Simon to discuss some of the issues raised by the show.
Great. Okay. First of all, I thought it might just be helpful for you all to have a bit of context of these two, who are both artists that also have curated this exhibition and previous exhibitions as well. So I'm just going to do the biog thing, just to put a bit of context onto them. So Simon Granell here studied fine art at Falmouth School of Art and then went on to do his MA at the Slade. He was nominated for the Picker Fellowship at Kingston and the Barclays Young Artist of the Year in 1992, which means he's not quite so young now. Cross mark. He's exhibited widely across the UK and in Spain, where he's also an artist in residence in Barcelona. And in 2007, both Eric and Simon were involved in an exhibition called Underground, which I saw, which was in the basement of Shoreditch Town Hall, which showed an artist called Roger Ackling as well, which is a kind of a site-specific collaboration between artists and with space, obviously. And he's currently a senior lecturer in fine arts at the Arts University College in Bournemouth. Oh, it's not college anymore, is it?
They dropped that recently.
Yeah. And he had a solo exhibition about his relationship with Sanchez Cotain, a painter, which was in Trondheim, Norway, in 2009. And then, and his painting, we've reflected his, one of his works is on the wall just there, and the smaller one there, which I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that from the talk. And then Eric Butcher studied philosophy initially at Cambridge University, and then fine art at Winchester School of Art. Sorry? Wimbledon. Yeah, it does say Wimbledon. Sorry.
I had to think then for a minute.
And he's shown widely in the UK, and then abroad in Germany, Italy, America, Australia. Received lots and lots of awards, including AHRC, AHRB it was then, Arts Council, and then he was also had 2 research fellowships, one in Bournemouth and one in Liverpool School of Art. And he's curated a number of exhibitions, including Mission and Definite Article and Underground, like I mentioned earlier. And as Lee mentioned, this exhibition, Machine Aesthetic, comes from both of their practices as artists. I'm picking up tendencies that they have as artists of the relationship of the man and the machine, but also, of course, other artists that they've pulled in that work in lots of different ways across multiple medias, which hopefully you pick up. But yeah, that's all I'll say there. So I thought a good place to start with a question to either or both of you, maybe you first, was how the project emerged in the first instance? Where did its kind of nucleus, its genesis come from?
It really kind of evolved out of a series of conversations that Simon and I had over the years about the role of mechanisation within our own practices. And I kind of conceived of the show and put together a proposal, sent it around to some of the kind of major public spaces around the country, and got absolutely nowhere. Lots of people said nice things about it, but nobody actually wanted to show it. So I got a bit kind of frustrated and petulant about it, and kind of moved on and did other things. So it went on a back burner for quite a long time, until Simon, who was always one of the artists in the show, kind of took up the baton. And well, maybe you can.
Yeah, I went to a Paradox event. I don't know if anyone's heard of Paradox. It's a sort of European forum for fine art education that meets biannually, and I went to this event in Cork in 2009, I think it was, and met Professor Helen Baker, who was chair of Gallery North at Northumbria University at the time. And I just asked her to have a look at it, to sort of give us some feedback and see where maybe it was a bit weak as a project proposal. And not only did she really like it, but she said, okay, we'll host this show. So that really got the ball rolling. And then I think once you've got somebody on side, it then becomes much more attractive to other people. And then Bournemouth were very interested, and it just started to snowball. And then I think that then also there was more a kind of defined project there, and then that's when we started actually getting in touch with the artists, because initially it was literally a kind of just a list of people that we'd like to be involved, but hadn't approached them at that stage.
Okay. It's quite interesting, I think. Obviously there's a lot of students here, but that sort of timescale, when was it initially that you were conceiving and touting the show around?
Donkeys years ago.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago or something. Yeah. And it was one of those shows. As a practicing artist curator, sort of an artist that does curating, you tend to have a number of projects at various different sort of stages of development. And some of those projects are fairly kind of near term, some medium, some long term, some, like this one, perhaps was never going to happen. And so that kind of works. You've got lots of sort of irons in the fire. But yeah, it was about 5 years ago.
Okay. I wanted to ask a little bit about selection of artists, of how you made the choices of who was in there. It's quite a big area. We kind of talk about having a long list of artists that are there. But did you have a criteria when you were selecting artists? Did you have the overall subject and then that break away into groups that you want to kind of reflect different types of practices? Was it just artists you liked that you kind of felt affinity with?
I think it was a bit of all of those things. It certainly wasn't something where we had a very strong kind of curatorial sense of what we wanted to do with this, and then we didn't, for example, have a number of ideas about points that we were trying to make about mechanisation, and then selected artists that sort of illustrated those points. That absolutely wasn't the way that we went. It kind of, again, it sort of evolved out of a fairly loose network of interests, people we knew, people who were influenced by other people we knew. It sort of evolved in this kind of very loose sort of manner. Natasha we've worked with before. Simon and I have obviously worked on a number of projects before. So yeah, it sounds like a really unsatisfactory kind of answer, but it sort of evolved fairly organically and gradually.
But I think part of that is because, as I say, it's taken so long, and your understanding of what a project was 5 years ago and what this is now necessarily evolves, and to some extent, I'm sure with you as well, that actually I'm thinking about other things as well that feel more current in a way. Sometimes, but I think one thing that you did early on was define 4 sort of loose categories, if you like, that weren't sort of conclusive. They were really, I think they're much more about how people can find a way into the exhibition, and whether it's and the fact that actually you can sort of try out different artists within different categories, and that's quite easy to do. But what it does allow you to do is just come at the same work but from a different tack each time. So some of the artists would probably fit into all 4 categories.
So the categories were.
Got them here.
Have you remind me? I've probably forgotten.
So there's, I guess, in the contextualisation of the show, what you'll find on the handout, on websites, on press releases, is obviously the overall machine aesthetic, and then a kind of a breaking up into 4 themes that are, like you say, to kind of almost help or to pick up different kind of aspects and different flavours.
Yes, because they were never intended as a sort of subheadings. As they were only ever kind of intended to be one way of carving up the territory, of which there might be many others.
And I quite like that idea because it almost hints at complexity in a kind of quite simple dynamic of just saying, there's these things, they're there. I'll give you a bit about them, and then you can go and work it out for yourself. So the 4 elements are machine components, then behaving like machines, mechanised processes, and art machines. So there's these kind of 4 different ones. And I think, like, we're all kind of visual people, so I think it'd be quite interesting maybe to break up each one and just talk about each theme, a little bit about what you meant by that, and also how you kind of see different works being picked up in those different themes. So we might just start at the top of this. So the idea of the machine components.
That one's extremely straightforward. It really is just about artists using products that are machine produced. It was as simple as that.
Okay, so within the show here, somebody like Tim Knowles' piece over there.
Yeah, or Rob Curry's piece here and here using, I think it's, well, in this case it's audio tape. So very much a material, unlike oil paint, for example, or marble or whatever. It's the material it's using is a machine-produced material that has another purpose.
And then that opens up, though, because with Tim and the installation that you saw in Bournemouth across those 2 pillars, he deliberately uses defunct technology. So he uses videotape and old cassette tape to kind of highlight sort of formal properties and the way it articulates things about space, but also just about getting to look at something that essentially is clearly very old and doesn't kind of is kind of useless because there are other things that kind of superseded it now, but it has a different kind of life. So the materials very much are machine made, but their sort of usage now is kind of opened up or sort of questionable.
Okay.
One of the things we were trying, sorry if this is getting off the subject a little bit, but there have been lots of shows that are sort of futurological, who are kind of looking into the very latest cutting-edge uses of technology, and I think that's a kind of fairly well-trodden path in a way, and I think we were trying to do something slightly rather different from that. I mean, you'll notice looking around, yes, we haven't shied away from technology. There are a number of artists using technology, but I think we're also kind of looking backwards as well as looking forwards.
Yeah, and was that kind of a very much a conscious decision? I mean, one of the things that I really kind of picked up when you kind of got in touch with me was you already had artists in place, was diversity of ways of media, of ways of working, but also output. So, yeah, that redundant technology, like cutting-edge technology, or something that's centuries old in the painting.
We really wanted to kind of look at the notion of mechanisation as opposed to machines or machine production or machines that make art. That's all part of it, of course, but it was really kind of mechanisation because that seemed to us to be an interesting feature and an interesting into an extremely wide range of artists' work, of our kind of immediate contemporaries, who might be doing wildly different kinds of work, but somehow this seemed to be quite an interesting interpretive framework.
For me, it's very much my interest, personal interest, as well as a curatorial one, is understanding that as a bodily concern.
Okay.
And just through, I've got 2 kids who are deeply into their iPhones and their relationship with technology is sort of, they're actually creating this stuff now. Technology in a way has become very individualised, it's become sort of a bit like this. And they are like ducks to water, they're just in it, and they're generating so much stuff, much of it very kind of temporary. But seemingly in a very kind of passive way, yet they are completely immersed in it, I'm quite interested in actually in this show trying to sort of get people to become a bit self-aware about that, and actually I think there's a responsibility, without trying to sound like a parent, that there's a need for some kind of distance and awareness and sense of responsibility about how we're using it. I'm not anti-technology at all, I just think it's about how it's used, because I think it's fantastic, but it's got to be, it's the management of it that I think we should be careful of.
Within that film, Machine Converts, one of the things you wrote was art's been at the forefront of this increasing dependence on machine production, and that's whether it's celebratory or critical, but they're acknowledging it, using it, adjusting to it, and I guess does that kind of, I think it's most apparent in Tim's piece over there for me that, maybe you could just talk about a bit of what we're seeing on the wall with the cardboard box. The monitor is deliberately not on at the moment, but that's the footage that has been recorded by the box, and basically Tim worked with the Royal Mail, and the box, when the lid's closed, it's actually got the delivery address on the top. That went on a 22-hour journey from his studio, I think, to this island. Is it Barra, off the north coast of Scotland?
I think it's the one where he sent it to his studio.
No, that one went to Scotland. So the machine in his case is the Royal Mail, is all the people that handled it in sorting offices, drove it in vans. It went on a plane as well, and it's the kind of. So the photographs are just stills from the animation.
So what happens is there's a camera inside the box. The box gets sent by Tim somewhere, and every something like a minute, there's a hole in the box which takes a photograph, and that's put together on an animation on the screen, which will be shown shortly. And these stills are stills from that animation. So. The second theme is behaving like machines, which, I don't know, I immediately kind of think of you and your work with that, but the kind of adopting a kind of a mechanised process within your way of working.
I think it's in a lot of people's practice at the moment, and I'd even think about Natasha's as well, because actually she's saying something about it, but from another point of view, because she sets these, she's a kind of orchestrator of these machines, and then off they go, and that one's broken now. But, her work breaks, it breaks down, it fails.
And that's all built into the nature of it. So it's...
But I think it still talks about the concerns that I have with my work, which are, again, about very simple, really. They're about making a whole set of decisions before starting, then in order to be directly involved with a process that can either be seen. Some people think it's actually an avoidance process, or I see it more as the opposite, which is a very as direct as possible engagement with an activity. And an activity that is so sort of singular and not repetitive as far as I'm concerned. You can talk about them being repetitive afterwards. But thinking about repetition is unhelpful or not part of the equation when the work's being done. It's literally using the same paint, the same brush, and applying brush strokes from top left to bottom right in a sort of textual format, and then masking off, and then a centimetre or so, and then starting the whole process all over again underneath, and then masking off again. So the more the painting's done, the more they get covered up in newspaper. So you're also kind of denied the opportunity to get a sense of how the painting's going. So it's the opposite of that kind of making where you can sort of push and pull and sort of make judgments about things like how well it's going or any of those things. All of those things are kind of switched off in order to just be more, I mean, these aren't the kind of David Granell works that most people know, but he's in that same sort of territory, and it's an incredibly simple activity. And then when you're trying to meditate, of course, you realise how difficult it is to be constant, to try and do the same thing over an extended period of time. It challenges boredom, all of those sorts of things. Yeah. And in a way, that for me, that's enough. And I have this kind of sort of perverse interest in taking something really simple, like a sort of tube of paint. And I think, being an artist is about you set yourself problems, and it's okay, what problem can I set with this thing? And doing something quite, pretty banal, fairly sort of, basically quite singular, but from that, actually making something that's sort of disproportionate, that is where, it's an overused word, but where something kind of, some transformation takes place. But for me, it's got to be in the material, for me. And the same with the other little painting. I mean, they both actually took about the same time, about a year and a half. And it's just, there's no kind of pretense, there's no sort of trickery going on with the application of paint. But they are absolutely the kind of result of doing something over and over again that then starts to kind of slip and distort. Okay. So people have kind of said sometimes with those that I've kind of deliberately dropped paint onto the canvas, and I've kind of manufactured this sort of the kind of quite odd surfaces that they have, but they're not. It's just painting brush marks. But of course, when you start to repeat that over and over again, then something else happens.
Yeah, we could consider the large painting by Dan Hayes, or my own work, which is the kind of scattered painted aluminium extrusions up on the top wall there. In the same kind of context, it's really about these different artists are disciplining their sort of minds and bodies to act in a sort of mechanised or to behave like a machine for various different ends, for different purposes. And Simon's just talked about the end for his work. It's really about behaving in a mechanised kind of way, adopting a quasi-mechanised type of behavioural characteristic in order to produce a certain type of result.
And you kind of talk of how, you sort of say mechanisation repeatedly renews its promise to be labour-saving. Sometimes it creates labour, and you seem to kind of pick up on that as artists, but also some of the other artists on the show, that the labour of behaving like a machine then becomes part of the act of producing, but part of the response from an audience as well.
It's about slowing things down. I think we have gadgets around the home. We have email. Well, this will ring true with any member of staff here. Email is probably the bane of your lives. And while it's sort of quick, it's just rapidly replaced with another one. And actually, for me, it's about slowing the whole thing down, and it is about just a level of disinterestedness, and actually having quite a distant relationship with the work to allow it to kind of become itself, rather than sort of feeling precious. I mean, when I finish a painting, I don't then suddenly rip all the paper off and have the big reveal. I just forget about it for a few months and then do another one, which I don't want to sound like an affectation, but actually it's because it's not what it's about. Making the work is what it's about, and what that does for me. What happens in the same with Dan's as well. I think he's they're incredibly. There's a kind of weird thing with his work is incredibly beautiful, sometimes highly seductive. Yet the kind of means of achieving that is almost at odds with that. There's a kind of very kind of forensic patience to achieving those beautiful images.
I mean, that's one of the things that I picked up a lot on is, if I was visualising a show called The Machine Aesthetic, and I know that, I forget the tagline, but the rolling machine...
Mechanisation and contemporary art, something like that.
There's a lot of things that are hand, the hand and the individual artist is very kind of present in all of the work, I'd say. And yes, the machine is there, but I see the kind of the artist over the machine is there.
That is a really good point, because if I were to think up what sort of show this might look like, just on the basis of the title, it absolutely wouldn't look anything like this. Yeah. A lot of this show doesn't shout machine aesthetic. I think that's kind of one of the interesting things about it, because you have to sort of be a bit more kind of archaeological about it and dig into it. And I suspect that, to be honest, that, as you know, there's a sort of tension between acting as a curator and being one of the artists in the show. Sort of curating yourself as a slightly weird, uncomfortable sort of thing. And I suspect that a lot of this show looks the way it does because we're the kind of people we are. We have our sort of interests, and so we're attracted by certain sorts of things.
Yep. Okay, I'll move on to third theme, which is mechanised processes. You talk of again of artists of every period being among the first to use new technologies, but they're maybe not kind of involving mechanisation in the final execution of the work. I think again goes for some of the ones that we talked of in that behaving like a machine, but that they rely on mechanical process to get there.
Yes, when you think of the use of something like the camera obscura in the sort of 17th century, or thinking of Mark Vaux's work, who was on the list. He was on the long list, but for various reasons didn't.
I think that's a good anecdote. Like again, you were talking last night about that, of reasons why artists are in the show, but also reasons why artists aren't in the show. Like he's a good case of.
He's a great example of how these things happen. Very often they just happen for really trivial, incidental things. He had a family problem, and just. Well, I don't want to get into details, but for various sort of personal reasons, it just didn't work out for him in terms of timing and other shows.
Same with, I invited James Huguenin as well.
Yeah.
But he was up for the Northern Art Prize at the time, and I had a really nice reply from Richard Ingleby, his gallery, saying he would like to, but he makes one painting a year, and they were all tied up, so it just didn't happen.
But going back to the point I was making about Mark Vaux's work, I mean, he makes these rather beautiful, he calls them enclosures, but they're sort of aluminium constructions that have painted sections within them, and those sections, the nature of those sections are driven by a computer program. So it's a chance, a computer program designed to deliver genuine chance, as opposed to kind of rolling a dice, which isn't genuine chance. There's a chance element to it, but it's driven by gravity and wind resistance and all that sort of. And so the computer bit doesn't feature in the work, but it's there in the background. It's the way the work is being generated.
Yeah, and I think that that's true of lots of the ways that artists are working. Myself being a painter, I use technology all of the time. I'm not really there at the end, but I think that, and that's always just been the case. It's about using the latest technologies, but it might but it's often within the process. It's often a way of getting.
I think one of the dangers, I can't remember who said it, but there's that thing about there's nothing as hard to kind of evaluate as sort of recent history. I'm sure somebody knows who said that, but it's the same with technology as well. You think of kind of web design a few years ago when there was a real kind of explosion on the internet, and there were all these kind of flash-driven sites, and actually a lot of it often had very little to do with content. It was just that, okay, this can happen, so we'll make it happen. And there's been a real swing against that over the last few years, where you look at a lot of artist websites, almost in that kind of tongue-in-cheek way. Everyone's using kind of Courier font and white pages or single blocks of colour. And, it's kind of settled down, so in some ways the internet is what's it doing? It's I don't know. The kind of form of the content, sort of the delivery of it seems a little bit more thoughtful. It's sort of, whereas when the new technology was coming out, it was kind of clearly just for the sake of it a lot of the time.
There's always in any kind of new technological, or even in something like the development of a sport or something. There's this sort of period of lots of quick innovation, lots of things change. The design of trainers quickly changes 1 year after another, and then it settles down to a kind of equilibrium where further evolution and development happens in a much more gradual.
Okay, I don't quite know where that ended up.
I don't either.
Did that answer the question or not?
No, that's fine. The final theme, and I think that for me, one of the things that I found interesting about these themes is that I immediately started looking at each of the artists and going, well, most of them fit into that. But I think it's quite useful to have something to hang work on or hang your thoughts on to go from, but that's not a prescriptive way of doing it. There's no text panels in here telling you what the work is and what it is about. There's a handout sheet that you can kind of pick up at your choice, and those 4 things are kind of reflected in it, but that kind of prescriptive or spoon feeding isn't there.
So it was a really deliberate attempt to say that this is a fairly arbitrary way of carving up the territory, but hopefully it helps a bit.
Yeah. And the final thing you had was art machines. So the work becomes a machine that does the art. And yeah, I guess it's again something I was picking up on, like historical figures that you kind of mentioned, that people like Chris Burden's piece in Tape Britain that was attempted to fly the paper aeroplanes across, or Jean Tingley, obviously. But often there's a thing of making a machine to do the job and it not doing the job. And it's kind of quite with. I saw that in Bournemouth working, and then it's come here and it's not working. And I kind of think, it dies.
But it was a different manifestation before that. In Newcastle, she showed 4 of the paintings without any of the plumbing. So she showed the end result of a process that had previously occurred in her studio. Then in Bournemouth, she showed 2 of them working. Now she's showing the apparatus that's required to make it work, but it's not working. We almost put that on the blue there just to sort of underline the fact that it couldn't have made those things, because otherwise there would be white paint all over the wall. But in the end, we thought it looked a bit crap.
Okay, I guess that's one thing that I want to pick up is the idea of having a touring exhibition. And some touring exhibitions will have the same work, and yes, you fit it to a space, but the show is formed. And with this one, work is come in, it's gone out, it's been to 2 very different spaces before here and seen different. So I guess I wanted to ask a little bit about that experience of the exhibition you see now is a different exhibition to the one that I saw a month ago in Bournemouth, even though there's some of the same work and some of the different work, and how that's been for you. But also, I guess, as a sub-question of that, is just the fact that was it a kind of considered choice to go to universities and the galleries within universities? Because 4 of the 5 venues are, and if there is a reason, then what is that reason?
Well, it's an important reason for me, because I, like you, I teach, well, Eric teaches, taught. Well, yeah, occasionally. You double mark essays now, don't you? But yeah, because I think university galleries are potentially quite interesting places in their role within universities and how autonomous they can behave or not. I think is quite interesting. But it's this is a place of education. I think that, this space has the potential to be a sort of primary source of research for students to draw upon. How that happens, whether it's coming and seeing shows like this, or students putting on shows, or working with guest artists, or it can happen in many ways. But I think they're really valuable things to have in universities. And part of applying and getting an Arts Council grant for this project was very much to do with about opening up the possibility of educating and trying to get the public in as well. For instance, at Bournemouth, in the last venue, they did a lot of schools workshops and things like that, where they took aspects of the show and got kids to do things with dice, or mark out the gallery with tape, or play with moire patterns and print, that sort of thing. And I think these are good places for that to happen.
While all of that's true, there's also an element of historical accident. The person who got, the first venue was University Gallery,
yeah.
And then the next gallery was the University Gallery, and so it seems to kind of make sense to have a show that runs through University Galleries. I mean, the transition thing at the end is completely different and will be dealt with differently. But,
and also, as you know, universities have got an agenda to involve themselves with other higher education institutions, and so it kind of works, it fits on lots of different levels.
I mean, going back to the first part of your question about the show looking and being very different in all these different sort of spaces. I mean, neither of us have ever curated or organised a touring exhibition before, and so we're sort of making it up as we go along. But part of the thing that I found interesting is that that's what keeps it interesting, is that all of the spaces have been wildly different, and you've got this kind of amorphous mass of an idea that you have to make sense in completely different sort of contexts and spaces, and that's one of the things that keeps you on your toes, I suppose.
Picking up on Simon's point of it being important to be within an education environment there, are there questions from the audience for either Simon or Eric about the show in general, specific works? It doesn't just have to be me asking questions. You can. You don't have to, I've got some others.
You can ask our questions afterwards.
Yeah. Alternatively, we could just get stuck into that wine over there, and you can ask questions while we're wandering around.
Yeah, that sounds good, doesn't it? I just wanted to, one last question for you, because I guess this is my personal interest question, which we kind of touched on in places throughout. But the idea of you being artists that are curating exhibitions, and do you see that as part of your practice as artists? Is it an extension of that? Is it something that you want to do because you want to see other people that work in ways and see that exhibition that other people aren't doing? Is that what does it mean to be an artist that does curating as well?
I think it's just something that I have sort of fallen into in a way. It's sort of been generated initially by other people not putting exhibitions of my work on. Or also just having ideas and wanting to see them realised, because nobody else nobody else has put on a show that's like this. I mean, I did quite a bit of research looking at other exhibitions that were in this kind of ballpark, and it was all about machines. It was all about the art machines that made art, stuff like that. And I just sort of felt a bit annoyed by it. I sort of wanted to explore that idea, and part of that is that it enriches my own sort of practice and my experience of art.
I think also it's about having control as an artist. You know, waiting for someone to give you a show or to take you up is, you know, it happens, but it's not common. And I think, but also when you're involved in that situation, you're absorbing quite a lot of the responsibility for what's happening to these other people. And actually, more and more artists are curators as well, or writers, or whatever. And it's about actually having control over the thing. So, you know.
I think it's also sort of born, perhaps I'm speaking personally, but it's born in part out of frustration with the nature of curation. So much curation these days seems to be about being a curator and not about the work that's being curated.
Okay.
And that's like, probably a fairly personal kind of gripe. I mean, our sort of...
What do you mean by that? In what way?
Well, curation seems to almost be an end in itself, you know, and the works of art or the artists are used as slightly irrelevant pawns, and the curator has become this sort of Svengali character. And maybe I've met too many people I don't like in this business. But there is certainly a sort of a style of kind of uber curator that's like this, you know, sort of super curator. I mean, our kind of modus operandi in putting this show together was not to go to artists and say, I want that work, you know, that work is going to make this, as I said before, you know, that work is going to illustrate this point. It was rather to kind of get these artists together and just sort of say, look, you know, here's an opportunity. Here's the idea of the show, you know, what do you want to put in it? You know, so we were very kind of light touch in that respect.
So it's like freedom for the artist.
Yeah, because that's the way that I would like to be approached if I were to be invited to be in a show like this.
Yeah, coming with a loose idea.
Yeah.
And then kind of working.
So the artists, in selecting their own work for this, I mean, it was within certain sort of parameters, and in some cases we said, oh, you know, not sure, you know, what I was really hoping we might put one of those in. But we gave them an awful lot of sort of selective freedom, or freedom to select rather.
And do you think that you almost were allowed that because you're an artist, because you're in the show, that you wanted that for yourself?
Because that's what I would like, if someone approached me, so that's what we offered other people, was that opportunity. Yeah. And, you know, if you're going to do something like this, you want to learn something. Even if you're in a show, I assume you want to learn something about, you know, other people's work or your work in relation to their work by being involved. And I've learned a lot from these other artists through studio visits and conversations, you know, with you as well. And, you know, so there's all that goes on as well. I mean, that may be invisible, looking at the work, but that's a kind of a very vital bit as well.
I think that's quite interesting, is that side of an exhibition that can be hidden. You know, that you end up with a space and objects within it, but the journey of putting it on includes so much else, and you can only ever show a snapshot of that at an end point. But it's kind of interesting that you go back to something that's quite personal. It's something that opens up conversations that you can have privately, and then that's extended forth into the show.
Has that learning, that journey, posed something new as a product of the experience of putting this show together?
Yeah,
but again, I think a lot of that's invisible. It's in here, or wherever that is. I think it's, yeah, I mean, I know there's other things that our discussions have kind of changed throughout, and they still are, through the process of this exhibition. And I think one of the things, again, that's invisible right now, but needs to be dealt with, is that when this goes to a transition gallery, it's a tiny space, isn't it? And this literally won't fit in that gallery. So today we've been talking about how we need to deal with that problem, and we've come up with 2 potential solutions, which we'll be letting you know about.
Get rid of all the art.
So
get machines to shred it.
It is needing to be re-evaluated all the time, otherwise it just won't work. So a lot of it is about just being kind of alert to what's actually going on, as opposed to what you hope or imagine is the case. And I think we've needed to behave in that way from the outset, really.
Okay. Unless somebody wants to speak up, I think that the idea of having some wine is quite a good one. Please feel free to come up and discuss. You know, sometimes you have got a question and you don't want to ask it in front of other people. But I think that, you know, to have the opportunity, I'm particularly looking at my street, to come and to talk to people that are directly there about it is something you don't often get in a gallery and an exhibition, and is only here for another hour and a half or so, with Simon and Eric being here. So I think, you know, use that about any kind of aspect of how it gets started, of the works that are there, how you kind of came about forming something, whatever that question might be. I kind of think, you know, you've both kind of generously said that you're happy to talk to people. So use that opportunity, please. So, great. I'd just like to thank you both for putting on such a great exhibition, bringing it to Lincoln.
I'd like to also thank Janine and you, Andrew and Richard and Tom. It's been really easy to put this show on here because everyone's been so on side and very organised and helpful and supportive.
That's nice to hear, isn't it?
No,
we're friendly here.
I think you have very good staff who are who want things to happen, and I think you're, you know, lucky is the wrong word, but it's good. It's all good.
Great. So can we just thank Simon and Eric? So yes, so there's wine there, there's art on the walls, and there's people that you can ask questions to.